Welcome. Thanks for joining us. You're watching I-24 News, coming to you live from Tel Aviv. An Egyptian soldier has reportedly been killed following an exchange of fire with IDF troops close to the border with Rafah. The IDF says Egypt opened fire first, and it comes after Israel opened an investigation into what it called a grave incident in Rafah. An airstrike against Hamas commanders set off a fire which killed dozens of Palestinian civilians seeking shelter nearby. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that the Rafah strike was a tragic mishap. We're trying to get up reaction from Cairo to the news of that exchange of fire between Egyptian and IDF troops. But first, with me in the studio this hour, Shiri Fein-Grossman is a member of Forum Dvorah, Women in Foreign Policy and National Security. She's also the former head of regional affairs at the Israel National Security Council. Great to see you, Shiri. A very busy 24 hours, and we've got a very dangerous escalation with Egypt. This would be a gift to the Hamas leader, Sinwar, wouldn't it? He's been very keen to draw Egypt into this conflict. Yeah, very much so. Yes, this is a troubling situation. We have to wait and see how it develops and what are exactly the details of both incidents, both at the border and both at Rafah, and what happened today at the camp. It's not the first time that we're, about a year ago, I believe there was a very deadly incident where Egyptian soldier, if I remember correctly, actually shot at 2 Israeli soldiers. So it's not the first time incidents between Israeli soldiers and Egyptian soldiers happen, but it's obviously everything is very, very delicate at this point, and we're seeing demonstrations also with Arab Israelis and worldwide with what happened with Rafah today. It's very it's not ordinary that the Prime Minister will go on and say that this is a mistake. Just goes to show that something that was really out of the ordinary and extraordinary happened here today. I want to just remind viewers, I don't remember any other organization from the other side saying that they mistakenly shot civilians. This is we not had a barrage of rockets fired at exactly, and that's the difference when you deliberately shoot at civilians or you do it accidentally. It's a war zone. I also want to remind that more than 23 Israeli soldiers were killed from friendly crossfire and accidents from the military. I also want to remind the viewers that 3 hostages were shot to dead by IDF soldiers, mistakenly identified. So this is a war zone. It's a deadly war zone. It's a very crowded urban area. It's tough. We're having very high standards from a comparative point of view of the low numbers of percentage of people out of civilians killed out of the civilian to combatant ratio is one of the lowest.
It's one of the lowest,
according to John Spencer.
Exactly. So you're familiar with the figures. So I wanna let's be cautious. Let's wait, and it just goes to show us how important our legal institutions are. We have an Attorney General, the Justice Department in Israel under the government. We also have an independent review that is going on in the IDF itself with military lawyers investigating this case, and we have mechanisms that were put in place in recent years. So this is crucial to understand.
For now, Shiri, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's get more now on that airstrike that Prime Minister Netanyahu has called a tragic mishap. Our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran, has the details.
If international pressure against Israel's offensive in Rafah wasn't high enough, this happened. An Israeli airstrike on the southern Gaza city on Sunday night set off a massive blaze in a tent camp housing displaced Gazans, killing at least 45 people, mostly women and children, according to the Hamas-run health ministry.
We were sitting at the door of the house safely. Suddenly, we heard the sound of a missile. We ran and found the street covered in smoke. We did not see anything. We went into the house and couldn't find anyone. When we checked over the wall, we found a girl and a young man who were killed.
The IDF said it eliminated Hamas's top commander in the West Bank, Yassin Rabi, and another senior official behind deadly attacks on Israelis, according to international law, based on prior intelligence, while using precise munitions.
Last night, the IDF targeted 2 Hamas commanders in Rafah, whose hands were drenched in Israeli blood. According to initial reports, these are initial reports, a fire broke out after the attack, which appears to have taken civilian lives.
Several Arab countries, including Egypt, Qatar, Jordan, and Kuwait, condemned the strike in Rafah, with Cairo calling it a deliberate bombing of displaced people's tents. Hamas called the strike a horrific war crime, while Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas called for immediate international intervention.
The details of yesterday's very grave incident in Rafah are still under investigation, and we are committed to conduct it in the fullest extent. The IDF regrets any harm to uninvolved civilians during combat.
Meanwhile, the heat on Israel and Rafah is rising even further after an Egyptian soldier was killed and several others were wounded in an exchange of fire with IDF forces near the Rafah border crossing. According to the Army's initial assessment, an Egyptian soldier fired first and multiple times toward the IDF forces. The Egyptian armed forces confirmed they are investigating the shooting incident, which could lead to further tensions between Jerusalem and Cairo.
Well, let's go to the south of Israel now. Our correspondent, Nicole Zedek, is standing by. And Nicole, the Prime Minister has held his hands up. He said what happened in Rafah overnight was a tragic mishap. Are there any more details about what exactly happened?
Certainly. It is still under investigation. The IDF is looking into it, but from the preliminary information and the preliminary findings that the IDF has released, they said that they did do a situational and an operational assessment before this precision attack to eliminate those 2 senior Hamas officials. However, even after that operational assessment, they said it didn't believe that any Palestinian civilians would be in harm's way following this attack. So now the main question being the fact that they did carry out this attack, and the initial findings do indicate that that strike did cause this fire, considering all of these tents from many of these displaced Palestinians were located in right next to the Hamas compound that was attacked. So that's likely the source of the fire. That's what the IDF initially is looking into, and it really seems to be the case. So the main question being, even after the IDF did this operational assessment, they used precise munition to target these Hamas officials, yet still civilians were put in harm's way. And so that's really what needs to still be uncovered through the investigations that to come. But the IDF also clear to state that this did not happen in the evacuation zone in the Al-Mawasi region. This did happen in the northwestern region of Rafah, but not where they have been telling the tens, hundreds of thousands of Palestinian civilians to evacuate for weeks now. They're still urging more and more Palestinians civilians to evacuate to that humanitarian zone in Al-Mawasi. But still, for now, it's still looking into exactly how something like this happened and to make sure it won't happen again as the IDF does continue their military operations inside Rafah.
Right, and Nicole, even as that horrible incident is still being investigated, a major escalation with Egypt, which of course is just the other side of the Rafah crossing.
Yes, and so we're still also learning more information about that. The IDF not releasing too much information, stating that there is an incident, they are investigating it, and Israeli sources telling I-24 News that they claim Egyptian soldiers fired first at Israeli troops at the Rafah border crossing. Now, the Egyptian armed forces confirmed that 1 soldier was killed in this situation. Israel also confirming they're in talks with Egyptian officials following this. They've been talking back and forth, but very little information released at this point as to what exactly happened along the Rafah border to allow these two different troops to fire and engage in this exchange of fire. But it certainly could indicate a very serious incident taking place between the Egyptian army and the Israeli army, as they're all right there on the Rafah border crossing, and could be another incident that the international community points to as an example to why they say that Israel right now should be following the most recent decision from the International Court of Justice. So certainly more information that we need to be keeping an eye on.
All right, Nicole, thank you very much. Nicole Zedek there in the south of Israel. Well, let's see if we can shed more light on that. Joining us now from Cairo, Hussein Kamel Haredi is the former assistant to the Egyptian foreign minister and the former director of the Department of Israeli Affairs at the Egyptian Foreign Ministry. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. And can you tell us what happened from your side, and can you tell us how does Cairo intend to respond?
Well, first of all, there is an ongoing investigation on the part of the Egyptian army, and there is a joint investigation by the Egyptians and the Israelis to understand what really happened and led to the killing of one Egyptian soldier. And incidents like that are expected when two arms are facing each other. And as your correspondent said, that it could, if the Israeli forces would remain at the Rafah crossing, such incidents, unfortunately, could be repeated. A long time ago, Egypt has warned against serious consequences in case the Israeli army would deploy along our borders with the Gaza Strip. And one of these serious consequences happened today. And of course, what happened today would have really an impact on the Egyptian people. So let's hope that this Rafah question would be solved as quickly as possible, and that Israeli forces.
When you say, sorry to interrupt, when you say the Rafah issue will be solved, what do you mean? You mean the IDF should withdraw from Rafah?
Yeah, yes, that's what I mean, madam, that the Israeli forces withdraw from the borders with Egypt, withdraw from the Palestinian side of the Rafah crossing. And I understand that as President Biden told the Egyptian President Sisi 3 days ago, the American administration would send a national security team to Egypt shortly in order to meet with their counterparts in Cairo and agree on arrangements to deal with the situation at Rafah crossing. Today, we've learned good news coming out of Brussels that the European Union has agreed in principle in sending observers, European observers, to man with Palestinians, to man the Palestinian side of the Rafah crossing.
But do you think that's reasonable, sir, when Hamas, a terrorist organization which has said it will fight any foreign presence in Gaza, is it wise to send international observers into the zone? And also, can you tell me, I mean, Hamas is a terrorist organization. Why does Egypt prefer to have Hamas controlling Rafah rather than Israel, a state with which it has relations?
We never said that Hamas, madam, should manage the Rafah crossing. That was a fait accompli after what happened among the Palestinians in June 2007. It was a fait accompli. We had to live with it. But our position, Egyptian position, is that the Palestinian Authority should run the Palestinian side of the Rafah crossing. And I guess that position was communicated, was conveyed by President Sisi to President Biden. So we are waiting for the talks that will be held by the American delegation with their counterparts in Cairo, and hopefully we can come up with arrangement that would be acceptable to the Palestinians,
absolutely,
to Egypt,
absolutely.
and to
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you again, but how would that work? How can Palestinian Authority or international forces go into Gaza now when Hamas is still in control?
Actually, I'm speaking about the Rafah crossing, not about the Gaza Strip as a whole, madam. The Gaza Strip as a whole, this is a different story. Now, from an Egyptian point of view, after what happened today and the killing of one Egyptian soldier, while the absolute priority from an Egyptian point of view is to solve the Rafah question. And I hope that the Israeli government and the Israeli public opinion would really grasp the seriousness with which Egypt looks at the present situation along our borders with Rafah, and the fact that Israel is managing the Palestinian side of the crossing, something that we cannot accept.
All right, Hussein Kamel Haredi, thank you very much.
Thank you, madam.
Sharifah Grossman with me in the studio. What is your reaction to what you've just said?
Well, I think there's a. First of all, I like his tone. I think it wasn't, very aggressive or very accusing of Israel. He said very, logical things, and I think the public, and I say this in Israeli media as well. You have to understand the importance of the peace treaty with Egypt. It's one of the main, pillars we have in our national security. We have a close cooperation between both armies, and we're seeing in recent years a large, an enlargement of armory, of weapons of the Egyptian army. So an escalation with Egypt, it's not something we desire. So first of all, and we have to understand the complexities of Egypt, a country of more than 110 million people. Okay, that largely opposes Israel from the public perception, and we have the President Sisi and
the population is hostile.
And the government that is trying to balance between the public opinion and the street, and we saw what happened in the past, and between its national interests. And we as Israelis have to consider that as well. We have to take that into account, both in Egypt and in Jordan.
All right, Shemi, thank you very much indeed for now. Well, to talk more about Rafah and about the IDF strategy in Gaza more broadly, we're joined now by Andrew Fox, Defence, Middle East and Disinformation researcher and a former airborne soldier in the British Army. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. So Prime Minister Netanyahu has called it a tragic mishap, what happened in Rafah overnight. The IDF is investigating. Hamas claims that the IDF deliberately targeted an area which had been designated a safe zone for civilians by Israel. What is your reading of what happened?
So, as always, we have two very strong competing narratives in events like this. The IDF are insistent that the area struck was outside the humanitarian zone, and they've published maps suggesting that the targeting point was an area to the west of the humanitarian zone. And clearly Hamas take the opposite view, and it's an area that we're going to have an investigation. We're going to have to try and work out what happened. The area that you're showing on screen now on fire, they've released videos today of 360-degree kind of panorama of that panorama video of that particular building that's burning. And one thing that does jump out to me is that it is actually an incredibly limited area. It's not very big. The video there looks quite misleading. And there we go, you can see it now. Yeah. It suggests that was a limited strike. It suggests that the munition used was not large. Hamas is saying it was a 2,000-pound bomb. That doesn't look particularly like a bomb of that size and the damage it would cause. So, there are elements here that certainly do support the IDF position. But we're fighting a sea of disinformation and misinformation and full and competing narratives. So it's, until there's a further investigation, you can only go on what you see and make informed judgments at this time.
Right, and we've got, world leaders condemning Israel. We haven't heard from the United States yet, but we've heard from the French President Emmanuel Macron and others who have been quick to say this is Israel's fault. And we should say the Prime Minister himself has called it a mishap. But as you say, an investigation is underway. And, we're only a couple of days into the IDF operation in Rafah. Isn't this inevitable that, even though the city's been largely evacuated, there are still around 300,000 civilians there? Is this just going to be too too difficult in terms of protecting civilian life, do you think?
It depends what you mean by too difficult. Ultimately, a mishap, any civilian death in war is a mishap or a mistake or a tragedy. There's no two ways about that. So the language used there, I think, is quite precise. In terms of civilian protection in Rafah, yes, there's still hundreds of thousands of civilians there. They have managed to move 900,000 plus to the humanitarian safe zones, which is no small achievement. But we have to remember that this is a war, and civilians and the innocents are always the highest proportion of casualties in any given conflict, unless it's something like the Falklands, where it's all fought out in the open countryside. If it's fought in a city, there will be civilian casualties, and this war is not necessarily particularly different from any other war. If you look at Homs or Rafah, or sorry, not Rafah, Homs or Raqqa, there's no huge difference in terms of the destruction that we're seeing. That's just the nature of urban warfare. And it's natural, of course, that people should react to that in an emotive way, because it's an appalling thing to see. The scenes of destruction caused by war are genuinely appalling. And on a purely human level, anyone's going to feel that way. But war is also part of the human condition. Wars take place. And the most important thing here is that the IDF are doing more than almost any army in recent history to try and protect civilians.
Andrew Fox. Andrew Fox, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Well, the Hamas leadership has told Qatar and Egypt that it will not participate in the negotiations for a hostage deal as a result of that IDF strike on Rafah. That's according to a report in Israel's Haaretz newspaper. Talks were expected to resume in Paris on Friday. 125 hostages are still being held in Gaza. Joining us now from Hostages Square down in Tel Aviv, our correspondent Balir Sladin. Balir, is the latest attempt at a deal now in jeopardy once again?
Well, it definitely looks like it because what we're talking about is Hamas saying today to a Saudi newspaper that after the operation in Rafah, or the attack on Rafah, where many civilians were killed, they don't want to participate in that negotiation. But let me just say that this is not exactly the case if we look deep into this, because Hamas, after all demands, Israel to actually announce a permanent ceasefire, including the full withdrawal of the Israeli soldiers from the Gaza Strip. So this is not the first attack where civilians are killed, and maybe it's not going to be the last one. But Hamas's demand and all what they care about is actually just Israel declaring that this is the end of the war, so they can declare victory. Now, we've heard that also from the Prime Minister of Israel today, saying that it's a lie, that he is the one that's sabotaging the deal, because the pressure should be on Yahya Sinwar and not him, because after all, 5 times when the team that negotiates with Hamas indirectly asked for extending the mandate that it has, the war cabinet actually agreed to that, and we've seen we've heard also the Americans saying that it was very generous from the Israelis last time, but Hamas again demands one simple thing, which is the permanent ceasefire. Today, Eisenkot, a member of the cabinet, said we should go for a deal no matter how long time we should stop this fight. But from what we understand, Hamas doesn't only require that the fighting stops for 42 days or 84 days. It requires actually a long-term truce with Israel, maybe for years to come. During those years, it can rehabilitate itself. It can once again maybe even gain political authority in the West Bank, something that Israel cannot accept. And that's why we are seeing this discussion here in Israel, while, according to what we understand, more than 125 people are still in Hamas's captivity. Some of them are still actually alive. But again, the families are demanding that Israel does whatever it takes to bring them back home.
Thank you, Balir. Balir Sladin there in Tel Aviv. The former US ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, is in Israel. She's been touring some of the sites worst hit by Hamas terrorists on October 7th, including the site of the Nova massacre and Kibbutz Nahal Oz. Our Zach Anders was there.
From Strout this afternoon, where 2 former ambassadors, Nikki Haley, the former UN ambassador, American UN ambassador, and Danny Danon, the former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations. Both spoke here after touring kibbutz Nir Oz and the site of the Nova Music Festival. The two of them together spoke with some of the survivors and a man who lived in Nir Oz his whole life, touring some of the burned homes and the sites of the massacre. You could see the former ambassador Haley emotional at times. The press conference here, quite a lengthy one, speaking about her support for Israel, how Americans should support Israel in its time of need.
So in reference to Rafah, when you're fighting a war and your goal is to finish Hamas, you have to go where Hamas is. Rafah is a central area to where we know Hamas is. So Israel has to go there. So when Israel's trying to eliminate Hamas, they have to go into these areas. If those Arab countries are that worried, they should take them. They should go and take whatever Palestinian citizens. But if they're not willing to take them, no one needs to say anything. I know Israel's doing everything they can not to hurt an innocent life. But this is war. Israel didn't start this, but Israel has to finish it.
And an interesting finger-pointing moment where she once again states that Hamas's actions provided or pushed forward by Iran, which is funded by China, and that Russian-supplied intelligence helped Hamas to commit these atrocities, really an interconnected web of global culpability, as she's pointing out here in her former role as the former American ambassador to the United Nations. Her tour of Israel, meeting with officials, will continue for the next several days, and then she's planned to jet back to America, where she will be involved once again in this election cycle, despite her dropping out of the Republican race and saying that she would vote for former President Trump, but coming short of saying that she will endorse him in his campaign against President Joe Biden.
Zach Anders there. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, a heavy barrage of missiles and rockets fired at northern Israel today by the Iranian-backed terrorist group Hezbollah. We'll get the latest for you next. Stay with us.
Israel's story must reach the whole world. The I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds.
De la frontière qui sépare Israël.
The state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. Now on Hot.
Welcome back. The Palestinian Authority Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa says his government is preparing to take power in Gaza. Mustafa has been meeting with EU leaders in Brussels, where he welcomed a recent announcement by Spain, Ireland and Norway's governments to recognise a Palestinian state, and said he hoped other EU countries would follow suit.
We're still hopeful as Palestinians that many decades of struggle and working towards independence are coming closer than ever before. These efforts, these announcements, these meetings are key building blocks towards making Palestine independent, sovereign, viable state a reality.
Well, for more, we're joined now by Sameh Sinijlawi. He's a Fatah activist and the chairman of the Jerusalem Development Fund. Thank you for being with us, Sameh. Great to see you. So we heard Prime Minister Mustafa there. He is, of course, Mahmoud Abbas's man. He was chosen by Mahmoud Abbas. Is that government ready to take over in Gaza?
And that government is not ready to control the West Bank, so he can say whatever he wants. The world does not need evidence that the authority is not controlling the West Bank and will not be able to control Gaza. I think why the part of the international community, including maybe the American administration, is still trying to keep Abbas in the game, because they don't want to see any collapse of his authority. They don't want to see the Somalia model in the Palestinian, but they know that he is not capable. And to unlock the situation in Gaza, there should be serious changes in the PA. It's not replacing a prime minister with a prime minister. It should be the president himself leaving the scene and empowering a political body that is more respected by the state.
Do you think there's any chance of that happening?
It will happen. By the end of the day, one day the war will end, and then everybody will be under a pressure of filling the gap there. So then everybody will start pushing towards something serious. Now it's a lost time. So they are, leaving Mohammed Mustafa to say whatever he wants. Now, in the last Arab League meeting 10 days ago, the Arabs didn't accept to pay the government of Mohammed Mustafa and Abbas any kind of money. They were requesting $100 million a month to replace the money that is blocked by the Israelis. So the Arabs did not want to pay him. Do you imagine that? Anybody in the world.
Why do you think they're reluctant to pay him?
They don't trust. Corruption is there. Yesterday, the president issued a presidential decree appointing the wife of Majid Faraj, the head of the intelligence, as a director general of an agency in the PA. So, I mean, out of nowhere, she has never been an employee of the PA, nothing. So this is how they manage. This is how they manage the PA. They manage the PA as if it is a private enterprise.
Everybody's talking about a revitalised PA. That is what President Biden wants. It's what the Europeans want. Everybody seems to think that there's going to be a revitalised Palestinian Authority that's going to swoop into Gaza, whether or not Hamas is defeated, and take power, and everybody will live happily ever after. I mean, where are the?
It's not happening. It's not happening. It's not happening. I'll give you another information. At the beginning of this week or last week, the Palestinian president instructed the Ministry of Finance to purchase new 5 G-Class Mercedes, armored, the most luxurious Mercedes in the army in the market to be included in his fleet. 9 million shekels. Is this the attitude of a responsible, reformed authority at the time that it is at the edge of collapsing financially?
Well,
you
would think not.
They can say whatever they want, but everybody is watching them and they see corruption is giving. Muhammad Mustafa himself does not live in the West Bank. He lives in Jordan. He comes Sunday morning and leaves Thursday afternoon. Can you imagine if the Israeli Prime Minister would have lived in New York and comes to his office in Jerusalem only in Sunday morning and leaves on Thursday afternoon?
I'm pretty sure there'd be some outcry. I want to ask you very quickly, Samo, we're running out of time. But in terms of more and more countries recognizing a Palestinian state, does this help the Palestinians? Because over 120 countries do already.
Okay, it's symbolic. I appreciate that, the countries are maybe in their intention are trying to push more the two-state solution. But on the other side, is this an achievement for the Palestinian Authority leadership? No, it is zero achievement, because the Palestinians would like to see that really things developing that touch their hearts, that touch their lives, that touch the level of their economic situation. They would like to see improvement. They would like to see a stop of the war in Gaza that is causing a lot of suffering. This is the achievement that the Palestinian people are expecting from the leadership. But this leadership is only focusing on exercises of counting votes in the General Assembly of the United Nations.
Trips to Europe and Mercedes-Benz. We're going to have to leave you there, Samer. I'm sorry to cut you off. We're out of time. But thank you very much. Great to talk to you.
Thank you.
Samer Sinijlawi there. Quick response from you, Sharifan Grossman.
It's just unfortunate that leaders all over the world, both in the PA and in Spain and in Ireland, care less about the well-being of Israelis and Palestinians and are just doing superficial, symbolic act that has no positive effect on our lives.
Except on their own domestic political scenes, perhaps.
Exactly.
All right, Shiri, thank you. All right, well, let's turn our attentions to the north. And an anti-tank missile fired by Hezbollah hit a home in Metula today, while a rocket sparked a wildfire near Kiryat Shmona. Let's go to the north. Our Robert Swift is there. Rob, a lot going on over the past 24 hours.
Yeah, even just in the last hour or two, it's been pretty busy up here. The most recent incident was a heavy barrage of rockets from Lebanese territory into the area around Kiryat Shmona. This was 2 barrages about an hour ago. The attacks seemed to be targeting the Beit Hillel base. We were actually close to this location, filming the fires that had been caused by an earlier Hezbollah attack. Hezbollah said that they had used drones earlier in the day to attack the base and to target the Iron Dome system. But whilst we were there filming, there was this barrage of rockets which was intercepted by the Iron Dome system. However, the falling debris from the interceptions has caused a number of fires around Kiryat Shmona. Some of them you may be able to see in the background behind me, and they continue to burn right now. This has been one of several attacks by Hezbollah throughout the day. You mentioned the anti-tank missile which caused damage to a building in Metula, a bit to the north of Kiryat Shmona, and there was also another barrage slightly further to the south and west, this time targeting the communities around Mount Meron. This was a couple of hours ago.
Rob, thank you very much. Robert Swift there in the north of Israel with the very latest on the attacks from Hezbollah. And Sharifan Grossman, the attacks don't stop. The Prime Minister wants everybody to return to the north by September 1st to send their children back to school. That is looking increasingly unlikely at this stage.
Impossible. I have a few friends that are continuing this mode of unclarity of what's going on. There's no way that they will return. Would someone in the audience send his kids to that kind of war zone? I think not. Having said that, I'm hopeful and I'm trying to be optimistic, as you know. We are making substantial, I think, progress in trying to figure technological solutions to these drones. Israeli innovation is hopefully will come to our avail. to kind of minimize the damage that we're seeing.
Shiri, thank you for now. Well, Iran's foreign ministry says the death of President Raisi a week ago will not affect either the country's support for Hamas nor its plan to negotiate the lifting of sanctions with the United States. The Biden administration has warned European allies of plans to punish Iran over its nuclear program as it tries to lower tensions with Tehran ahead of the US presidential election. That is according to a report in the Wall Street Journal, which has been denied by several high-ranking US officials. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Dr. Walid Fares, foreign policy expert and the author of many books, including Iran, Imperialist Republic. Good to see you, Dr. Fares. Thank you for being with us. Is it conceivable that the Biden administration would try to appease Tehran for domestic political reasons, despite all of the chaos it's unleashed in the region?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's what this administration and even the Obama administration, but this one went beyond the Obama limits, are trying to appease a regime with which they have an agreement. The issue is, on the one hand, the elections. Yes, the president, his administration, his advisors wants to calm down the situation on the one hand. Therefore, they don't want a lot of pressure on Tehran. On the other hand, there is something else that is not very visible, as we know. It's the Iran deal. The Iran deal is still ongoing despite October 7, despite the attack by Iran on Israel, despite all what's happening in the region. And it's not just about Israel and Iran. It's about the Arabs, the Arab coalition, which was formed in 2017. So the answer to your question, yes, those who are in charge of the Iran dossier wants the president and his administration to calm down issues with Iran's regime, the Islamic Republic, that is.
Is there any pressure, any pushback from Congress on this that might make a difference?
Oh, absolutely. Again, this is the new equation since, I would say, a few weeks or a few months. You have more elements or more members of the Democratic Party in the House. The House has a majority that would oppose anything to do with creating a new agreement with the Islamic Republic of Iran. On the other hand, what we have seen is that a number of Democratic senators in the Senate are now siding with the Republicans to stop any issue of cooperation, collaboration with the Islamic Republic before Tehran changes policy.
I mean, there was quite a lot of shock following the death of President Raisi a week ago, when we saw the UN flag at half-mast, when we saw condolences from the US State Department, from the European Union, from NATO. I mean, is this all part of the same appeasement, as you call it, to try and get Tehran to rein in its nuclear program? And is this only going to get worse?
I would say it's deeper. Of course, it's going to get worse, but it is deeper because it's not just about elections. It's not just about, ongoing business. It's about commitment made by large financial interests in Europe who are actually having markets and having money, deals with the Iranian regime, but also here at home in the United States. These forces that are profiting from the Iran deal for years, and now, of course, since October 7, they want to try to save those interests because the public opinion has shifted, but these interests have not shifted. They're still here. So all what they can do to appease the regime means, at the UN, at the European Union, Parliament, State Department, with a lot of opposition by many people on both parties, in both parties here. Everything they can do to preserve their interests, they're going to pressure the Biden administration. They're going to pressure the EU. Now, if we have a change of administration or of policy next fall or next winter, then things are going to change. Then the U.S. policy will change at that time.
Dr. Walid Fares, we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Shiri Grossman with me.
I just want to say quickly, I think the American administration has to learn the lesson we did, and that is you can't just play defense. You have to go on the offensive. If you just play defense, you're going to get a lot of victims. And in the end, you're going to pay the price. And it's other U.S. presence in the area that will pay the price, or U.S. allies like us, like Saudi Arabia, like others. So again, They have to stop pretending everything is okay. We have this, mutual program to kind of to contain attack. This doesn't work. You have to go on the attack, and if you don't, you just hurt yourself, and you become a victim.
There's clearly no appetite for that in the United States.
Well, clearly the election time, but this is exactly what the Iranians are counting on. They just, when Trump was there, not that I'm saying Trump had the best strategy to defeat Iran, and even he didn't actually react or retaliate enough again when Iran attacked the Aramco facility in 2019, and this is where everything started. And he had to be more forceful. But I'm saying, don't make that mistake and make it even worse. The Iran deal, containment, this doesn't work.
All right, Shiri, for now, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, China is to host several leaders of Arab states next week in Beijing. Among the delegation, Egypt's President Sisi, Bahrain's King Hamad, Tunisia's President Sayed, and the Emirati President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. Well, to talk more about all of that, Caris Whitty is the founder and executive director at the Signal Group. Thank you very much for being with us, Caris. So, the Chinese Vice Foreign Minister today denied that Beijing is trying to fill a power vacuum in the Middle East, a vacuum left by the United States. What do you make of those comments?
China is continuously pursuing its interests. On the one hand, it looks to us from the outside like it is filling a power vacuum or making a move to take more control over relations between among the Arabs, between the PLO and Hamas, for example, to build on their Saudi-Iran rapprochement agreement. However, the Chinese want to portray it in a way that's different. They don't want to look like the U.S. They don't want to appear to be pursuing a similar approach to the U.S. or different tactics, different strategy, different cultural framework, so that it looks like they can be, or they would like to portray themselves as being friendly to all the nations, working with everyone in order to achieve peace in the region, to be against aggressive acts like we see when the U.S. was shooting back at the Houthis in Yemen. China said that there was no UN mandate for this. So they're pushing to look like they're taking a very different track. Whether or not they're actually filling a vacuum is another question, and I would say that they're probably right. They're probably not stepping into the U.S. shoes.
And how does China's tolerance of non-state actor terrorist groups in this part of the world compare with how they deal with such threats at home?
They see it as totally separate issues. That this is their territory, their land. They should manage it in the way that works for them. They have they're proud of the fact that there's no more terrorism in the Xinjiang area where there once was. There were various acts of violence by different groups living there. They see the other terrorist, or not other, but different groups. They will not see them necessarily as terrorists or determine them as terrorists, depending on how it fits into the Chinese framework. So, for example, they have not called Hamas a terrorist organization. From their perspective and to advance their long-term goals, it appears they want to keep their options open. Hamas is connected to Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood has presented a number of problems for Beijing, and by appeasing Hamas, perhaps they believe that they are going to avoid and prevent that from spilling into different parts of China.
Now, China did manage to pull a rabbit out of the hat a year ago, didn't it? It shocked everyone by brokering that deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. We don't know how deep that goes, but they did get a handshake and they did get a deal. I mean, might they have some fresh ideas when it comes to solving the conflict here?
Well, I think it was quite clear to everyone that Saudi Arabia actually approached China, and they were looking for a way to help ensure that Iran would stick to the rules, stick to the agreement, and they believed that China and Iran's dependency on China would lead to a more solid, long-lasting agreement. So the two sides were looking for China to do this, both Iran and Saudi Arabia. It's completely different when we're talking about Fatah and Hamas, which are so deeply divided, and the request being made is not a simple rapprochement. There are deep-seated agreements that they'll need to make. And we had a conference a couple of days ago by Signal Group, and Ephraim Halevi said there in a response to a similar question that he didn't see that the Chinese were going to make any headway whatsoever. They are planning to host all the different Arab groups from this region from the West Bank and from Gaza in Beijing in June, and they're hoping to build some kind of joint understanding. But if we look at it historically, and if we look at who the players are, it's hard to see that it's going to work out in any similar way as it did with Iran and Saudi Arabia. And by the way, we're watching Saudi Arabia work on a defense pact or deal with the United States while they still have this agreement with Iran. So how strong, how powerful, how far-reaching is that agreement?
Gary Switty at Signal, we appreciate it. Thank you. Well, Shiri Fine-Grossman is with me in the studio. So China clearly trying to move in where it appears the Americans have left off.
Yeah, definitely. This is part of, this is actually the #1 strategy priority for the United States in the Middle East, is to kind of push back China both militarily and economically from the region. China and Saudi Arabia taking advantage of the codependency they have. Carice had an excellent conference last year that I was fortunate to attend. So, and I completely agree. I mean, the #1 issue for the U.S. in the Middle East right now is China, and the #1 issue for Saudi is Iran. And like we spoke before, if the U.S. is only going to play defense, Saudi has no choice but to diversify its allies and the way it protecting itself. So this is kind of what's on the table with the normalization agreement. It's not really, and I've said this before many times, it's not an Israel-Saudi issue. It's a U.S.-Saudi issue that has to do with China.
All right. Shiri Fine-Grossman from Forum Dwora, thank you very much. Now, over 130 people have died in a hospital in Sudan's Darfur region after fighting intensified between the Sudanese armed forces and the RSF paramilitary group. For more on that, we're joined by Monim Haroun, Advocacy Manager at HIAS Israel. Thank you very much for being with us. And Monim, and I know this is a story that is really not getting a great deal of international attention right now, but just talk us through, what is the humanitarian situation in Darfur right now?
Hi, Leora. Thank you so much for having me. And yes, I'm working for HIAS. The humanitarian situation in Darfur and Sudan, and in Sudan in general, is dire and is worsening by the day. The civilians are under extreme violence, displacement, and face a very lack of basic necessities, such as food, water, and medical supplies. Actually, I was just speaking to my brother yesterday, who is still in Darfur, and he was telling me that every single one he knows with a kidney disease has died due to the lack of medical treatment and medical supplies. And that is just one example of the extreme situation that people face in Darfur due to the violence and armed conflict that is going on. And unfortunately, this humanitarian situation is extending to the neighboring countries. As one of the organization, HIAS, as one of the organizations that has been working for the last 20 years, providing support for refugees in Darfur, are bearing witness the scale of this humanitarian crisis, as refugees arriving to neighboring Chad in large numbers, and in where they face also a lack of these basic needs. People sleeping on the ground with no sleeping materials, and also a lack of accessing very basic needs.
Monim, we're getting some...
The humanitarian crisis...
Yeah, sorry, it's just we're getting... we can see these horrific images, and we're getting increasingly worrying reports, as you say. Are we looking at a second genocide in Darfur?
Unfortunately, what is going on in the violence and the extreme conditions that the civilians are facing in Darfur could echo what the tragic events that occurred in Darfur back in 2000s, and the scale and the horrific circumstances that the civilians are facing are could simply be explained as one of the worst humanitarian disasters on the planet currently.
Are you getting are you getting anywhere with your efforts to get some help from the international community? So,
international community are doing some efforts, but unfortunately, these efforts are not enough. We are seeing international bodies and countries calling for ceasefire to stop the violence, but unfortunately, this conflict has been going on for 1 year now, and it doesn't seem to be ended soon. So these international efforts needs to be increased. There's a need to be a robust intervention by the international community to provide both to end the violence in Sudan immediately, and also to provide access for humanitarian aid for those who are facing severe conditions in Sudan. Where just the numbers are really concerning, with some mentioning that over 25 million Sudanese are in imminent threat of starvation and famine.
Wow.
And people are being killed for daily basis, and over almost 9 million people displaced, half of them
25 million at risk of starvation. We're out of time, Monim. We have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Monim Haroun at Hayas, Israel.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of the show. Stay with us on I24 News. Benita Levin will be with you next. Good night.
Tel Aviv is ranked the happiest city in the world and the best place to own a home. For 3 generations, the Ben Shalom family has built boutique apartment buildings in the most desirable locations. From restoration in historical locales to homes along Park HaYarkon, Ben Shalom is a one-stop shop from start to finish, and friends for life.
This is Breaking News Edition. I'm Benita Levine. A high-level investigation is underway into a fatal blaze in Rafah in southern Gaza overnight after an Israeli strike targeted 2 Hamas commanders in the area. Initial investigations suggest the strike likely sparked a blaze that spread to a nearby tent encampment. Officials in Gaza say at least 45 people were killed. The United Nations saying it's deeply troubled by the strike, calling on Israeli authorities to conduct a thorough investigation. UN envoy Tor Vennesland calling for an immediate ceasefire and the unconditional return of hostages abducted by terrorists from Israel on the 7th of October. The African Union is meanwhile accusing Israel of flouting an International Court of Justice ruling that appeared to order a stop to military activity that endangers civilians in Rafah. Meanwhile, in recent hours, an Egyptian soldier killed in a gun battle with Israeli troops at the Rafah crossing. The IDF saying it's in touch with Egypt over that incident. More in this report by our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran.
If international pressure against Israel's offensive in Rafah wasn't high enough, this happened. An Israeli airstrike on the southern Gaza city on Sunday night set off a massive blaze in a tent camp housing displaced Gazans, killing at least 45 people, mostly women and children, according to the Hamas-run health ministry.
We were sitting at the door of the house safely. Suddenly, we heard the sound of a missile. We ran and found the street covered in smoke. We did not see anything. We went into the house and couldn't find anyone. When we checked over the wall, we found a girl and a young man who were killed.
The IDF said it eliminated Hamas's top commander in the West Bank, Yassin Rabi, and another senior official behind deadly attacks on Israelis, according to international law, based on prior intelligence, while using precise munitions.
Last night, the IDF targeted 2 Hamas commanders in Rafah, whose hands were drenched in Israeli blood. According to initial reports, these are initial reports, a fire broke out after the attack, which appears to have taken civilian lives.
Several Arab countries, including Egypt, Qatar, Jordan, and Kuwait, condemned the strike in Rafah, with Cairo calling it a deliberate bombing of displaced people's tents. Hamas called the strike a horrific war crime, while Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas called for immediate international intervention.
The details of yesterday's very grave incident in Rafah are still under investigation, and we are committed to conduct it in the fullest extent. The IDF regrets any harm to uninvolved civilians during combat.
Meanwhile, the heat on Israel and Rafah is rising even further after an Egyptian soldier was killed and several others were wounded in an exchange of fire with IDF forces near the Rafah border crossing. According to the Army's initial assessment, an Egyptian soldier fired first and multiple times toward the IDF forces. The Egyptian armed forces confirmed they are investigating the shooting incident, which could lead to further tensions between Jerusalem and Cairo.
So for the latest, let's go live to correspondent Nicole Zedek. She joins us from the Israel-Gaza border. So Nicole, let's start with the most recent development. An Egyptian soldier killed in a gun battle with Israeli troops at the Rafah crossing. What is confirmed? What can you tell us?
Very little at this point confirmed, Benita, but the IDF is confirming that there was a situation on the Rafah border, saying that there was an exchange of fire and that Israel is now in talks with Egyptian officials to talk about the incident that took place. And what we're also hearing from the Egyptian armed forces is confirmation that 1 soldier was killed. Now, Israeli sources telling I-24 News that it was the Egyptian troops that started firing at Israeli troops, who then exchanged and returned that fire near the Rafah border crossing. But at this time, that's truly the very little information we know. The incident is under investigation by both Israeli and Egyptian parties to see exactly what happened, because the fact that one Egyptian soldier was killed, the fact that we even saw an exchange of fire between Egyptian troops and Israeli troops, certainly a very serious incident that took place right there on the Rafah boarding and on the Egyptian border. And so as we do learn more information, it'll be interesting to see how exactly this happened between the two parties.
Thank you so much. Correspondent Nicole Zedek, live from the Israel-Gaza border. Thanks, Nicole. And now for more. It's a pleasure to welcome to studio Avi Pazner, former Israeli ambassador to France and Italy and the former world chairman of Keren Hayesod United Israel Appeal. Yaakov Lapin, military and strategic affairs analyst at the Miriam Institute, the Jewish News Syndicate and the Alma Center. And our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here. Much on the go, as always. I want to start, though, with the latest development. Ariel, we just heard there the update from Nicole around developments in terms of Egypt, in terms of the Rafah crossing, in terms of IDF troops. The latest, what is known, there is much concern about that latest development.
Right, Benita. So Nicole pretty much gave most of the, if not all the details, that the Egyptian side confirmed that one of their service members operating on the Egyptian side of the Rafah border crossing, he was killed in an exchange of fire. The understanding is that the soldier opened fire at the Israeli forces on the Israeli side, and the commander of the forces there ordered the soldiers to fire a warning shot in the air. When the shooting from the Egyptian side continued, that's when the decision came to retaliate to the source of the fire. According to the IDF statement, they are investigating this incident alongside the Egyptians, and that's important that there's cooperation with this, with the Egyptian side. At the end of the day, whatever the investigation in Egypt will show, it will appear that this was most likely a rogue soldier who operated on his own account. It wouldn't be the first. There was a similar terror attack not similar. There was a terror attack back in June with an Egyptian border police officer who infiltrated the border and killed 3 Israeli soldiers. And there was also the day after October 7th attack, Egyptian police officer opened fire at Israeli tourists, killing 3 of them and also the Egyptian tour guide. So there's indeed a sentiment in Egypt that an anti-Israel sentiment that unfortunately is carried out by members of the security forces who have their own personal weapons and can cause damage. But at the end of the day, this doesn't mark, in my opinion, a shift in the strategic and security relationship and cooperation between Israel and Egypt, as unfortunate as this incident may be.
And Yaakov, your take on the global spotlight right now, obviously on Rafah, on developments overnight. Benjamin Netanyahu calling it a tragic mishap. The investigations are underway. Your assessment?
Yeah, of course, it is a tragic mishap. And, you know, what we're hearing from the IDF is that the Israeli Air Force took all of its usual steps before a strike like this to try and make sure that there would be no civilian casualties. So that includes aerial surveillance prior to the attack, poring over the data, choosing munitions. They chose 2 relatively small munitions to strike this target, which was a very important military terrorist target. 2 senior Hamas commanders who were in charge of orchestrating years and years of terrorism in the West Bank. They were the target. And it looks like, despite all of these efforts, a fire started spreading to this tent, and it is a very tragic and sad development. And now Israel is going to have to deal with the fallout, and the timing is particularly difficult because, you know, Israel is facing an array of international forces right now being spearheaded by the ICJ and the ICC and all of, you know, the Hamas, I would call it the non-military battlefield activation network that is aimed at getting Israel to stop the war before Hamas is defeated. That's the goal of this array, and these kinds of incidents are going to play into the hands of that kind of campaign. So it's going to be an uphill battle for Israel to essentially explain that this was a tragic operational accident, that the last thing that Israel would want to do is something like this. And the Israeli Air Force and the General Staff are going to conduct an in-depth investigation. How many people in the world will be interested in the results of that investigation? I'll let the viewers make up their minds about that.
And we are going to take a deeper look at that reaction across the spectrum in just a few moments. Gentlemen, stay with us right now, though. First, we're going to cross live to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. He joins us from New York. Mike, good to see you. As we've been discussing here in studio, those initial investigations suggest the civilians killed in Rafah overnight died in this blaze started by the strike on Hamas commanders there. The U.S. has long voiced its concern around civilian deaths during the IDF security operation to root out Hamas. So how is Washington responding right now?
Well, it's Memorial Day here in America, so we're not having the traditional briefings we usually see from the likes of the State Department, the White House, and the Pentagon at all. But the National Security Council at the White House has released a statement from their spokesperson saying that the devastating images coming out of Rafah are heartbreaking, and that Israel has a right to go after Hamas, and that the White House understands that the strike killed 2 senior Hamas terrorists. However, as the White House says, they've been clear before, every precaution must be taken to protect civilians, and the White House is actively engaging both the IDF and its partners to get an on-the-ground assessment of exactly what took place, and the White House said it understands that the IDF is conducting an investigation. Obviously, this is just the beginning stages, and when everybody returns to business here tomorrow, I'm sure we'll be hearing more.
The United Nations saying it's deeply troubled by the strike. It wants Israeli authorities also to conduct a thorough investigation. Tell us more on that front.
Yeah, Tor Wennesland, the UN's point person on the Middle East peace process, if you can call it the peace process, laid out a statement earlier today, essentially saying the same thing. The images are devastating. There's no safe place in Rafah, and that the IDF must carry out, and the Israeli government, for that matter, must carry out an immediate, thorough, and independent investigation of exactly what took place. We understand Egypt has called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. There's been no answer yet from the Council presidency itself as to what might take place this week, though I can imagine as quickly as the Security Council has responded to other incidents within the context of the Israel-Hamas war since October 7th, I have very little doubt we'll see an emergency meeting of the Security Council within the next 24 to 48 hours.
On top of all the latest developments, as always, thank you so much. Senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim, live from New York. Thank you, Mike. Avi Pazner, the reaction has been swift. Palestinian Authority leader Mahmoud Abbas accusing Israel of deliberately targeting civilians, as did Egypt, as did others. Talk to us about the fallout right now.
First of all, it's obvious that this is an unfortunate accident. We all regret, and we didn't target, and we do not target civilians. That's obvious. And now this is exactly the kind of incident we didn't need now. You know, there was the ruling of the ICC on Friday, which left open the possibility for Israel to conduct its operation in the Rafah area by taking good care to protect civilians. I mean, it could have been, it's an interpretation, one of the interpretations. And now that this has happened, this puts us on the spot from the point of view of international opinion, of the ICC, of the UN, as we said. But here I want to point out to the relatively muted and moderate American response to what happened. If I compare, for example, to the EU declaration or to the Arab declaration, of course, the US declaration is muted, is moderate, doesn't condemn Israel, recognizes the right of Israel to act against Hamas, and asks Israel to take more measures to protect civilians. I don't know if this is the final American reaction. Let's not forget it's Memorial Day today. Nobody's working in Washington. Let's hope that this is the reaction which we will continue to hear from Washington in the days ahead, meaning that there is an understanding that we take all precautions to avoid that kind of incident.
That may be the thinking through the United States. However, Qatar says the strike could hinder hostage deal talks.
Yeah, it's obvious that Also, by the way, not only that, the incident with Egypt, one of the mediator in the hostage situation, also renders it more difficult. It's obvious that these two incidents, which happened in the last 24 hours, are very harmful, both to Israel's position in the world and to the negotiation. You know, just a few days ago, we restarted we tried to restart the negotiation. Now, with this unfortunate incident, it's a pullback, that's obvious, but let's wait a day or two, let's put things in perspective. We anyhow should do every effort to go ahead and try to renew this negotiation.
Ariel.
And on that point, Osama Hamdan, a senior Hamas official, gave a press conference in Beirut about an hour ago where he gave Hamas's response to these incidents. And regarding the negotiations, he said that Israel's, quote, procrastination and airstrikes may mean that its hostages will return as nothing more than corpses and perhaps may never return. They're trying to use this opportunity to put more psychological pressure and warfare on Israel. Now, regarding the incident on the border with Egypt, saying we don't have any more information, but this is another example to prove that Israel only speaks in the language of force and does not respect Egyptian sovereignty. And regarding the strike in Rafah, Hamdan denied the presence of the senior Hamas officials, saying that there were no armed members of Hamas present at the site. And that's exactly something that what Yaakov described was in the initial intel gathering of the target, making sure that they were indeed there. I guess what the preliminary preparation for the operation didn't take into account is that this is a tent city with even the smallest spark could start such a large fire and spread very quickly as it did. That is expected to come up in the investigation as perhaps something that was not really put enough focus on prior to the attack.
We're going to take a deeper look at that investigation later on in this broadcast. Gentlemen, stay with us. There's clearly much to unpack right now, though. We go live to our correspondent, Robert Swift. He joins us from northern Israel. And Rob, a rocket barrage of more than 30 rockets launched from southern Lebanon at the Mount Meron area in northern Israel in recent hours, sparking a fire near a community. What is the latest? What update can you share this hour?
So there's been two large barrages on two separate areas of Israel's northern communities this evening. The first, the one that you mentioned, the Meron rocket attack, that took place about 5 o'clock. A large barrage which landed around the Mount Meron area and with rocket sirens going off in several Israeli communities around that area. About a little bit later, about 6:30, there was a double barrage targeting the area around Kiryat Shmona. They seemed to be targeting the Beit Hillel base used by the IDF. There was a large number of interceptions there taking place. The IDF said that in that barrage there was at least 20 rockets launched. And that there were impacts inside the city. Images on social media appear to show at least one building which has a hole in the side of it. It's unclear at this stage if that's a direct impact or if it is part of shrapnel which has come off of one of the interceptions. We saw interceptions taking place basically above our heads, and you could see bits of debris falling off of them, landing in the road below. And some of those have caused fires in at least two separate areas around the city of Kiryat Shmona. There has been fires caused by the falling debris, with the local fire department moving around the city quite rapidly to battle these blazes.
And of course, Rob, we also know the Israeli Air Force targeting a Hezbollah operative in southern Lebanon, where launches were carried out towards a kibbutz in northern Israel on Monday morning. What is the latest in terms of the response out of the IDF?
That's right. So the IDF said that it had conducted the airstrikes which you referred to. That took place earlier this morning. There's usually a slight delay in the IDF carrying out these strikes and then confirming them. We have seen a couple of hours ago there was a lot of IDF Air Force activity taking place in the far east, the area around Majd al-Shams. There was quite a few large booms coming from there, which it seemed to be airstrikes, although we don't have confirmation on that. And the IDF has just a short while ago said that it targeted the launch site of the first of the two barrages that I mentioned, the barrages around Mount Meron, that it had targeted where that fire originated from.
Thank you so much. Live from northern Israel, that's our correspondent, Robert Swift. Thank you, Rob. And now back to studio. Yaakov, your take on the persistent exchanges across that northern front between southern Lebanon, northern Israel. It's regular, it's daily. How long until there is a full operation out of Israel inside southern Lebanon?
If at all. So there are two things going on in the north. One is it's getting worse. It is slowly getting worse, and it's becoming sort of the quiet war that gets pushed to the side all of the time because of Gaza. But at the same time, we see that both sides, Hezbollah and the IDF, are sticking to what they describe to themselves as the rules of the game. Geographically hemmed in strikes most of the time. We don't see Hezbollah going, after Haifa or Tel Aviv. We don't see the IDF hitting targets in Beirut on any regular basis. So there are rules here. And the question is why, right? So for Hezbollah, I think the situation is extremely convenient. They get to say that they are expressing solidarity with Hamas, conducting Iranian orders, implementing the Iranian orders to keep Israel militarily divided along two fronts. If it turns into a war, they'll fight that war. I don't think they're deterred by that at all, contrary to some other assessments. And if not, then they'll declare victory. They'll say that, we have been firing on northern Israel, turning it into a no-go zone for almost 8 months. And, we walked away to tell the tale. The Israelis did nothing. So as far as they're concerned, they're in a win-win. The IDF and Israel are, of course, in a very different situation. If the Gaza war wouldn't have been raging, we would have been at war with Hezbollah under these circumstances a long time ago. But the War Cabinet continues to prioritize the Gazan arena, and it will continue to do so, in my opinion, until the Rafah operation is complete. Once the Philadelphia corridor and Rafah are in IDF hands, that's when the stop clock will run out. And the War Cabinet will have to make a decision. Will it go for a ceasefire? I think it will try to do that. And if that's not feasible, then that's the moment that we'll see the Israeli tanks rolling into southern Lebanon.
Avi, your response?
There are 2 points I wanted to make. One, you saw that much of the Hezbollah's fire was directed at Meron. And we had on Meron this gathering, and it shows only the irresponsibility of the leader of the Orthodox, or let's say the extreme Orthodox Jews, who tried yesterday by force to enter Meron. And we were very lucky, we are all very lucky that this did not happen yesterday night, but today, because yesterday night, illegally, because it is a closed military zone, there were thousands and thousands of people there, and it could have been a massacre. And secondly, I want to say, I completely agree that Israel has no interest now in opening a second front. Every military strategist you ask will tell you that you have to concentrate, first of all, on one front, and then, if need, on another one. And so I do not believe that in the near future we will break this equation that we saw for the last 8 months. Meaning, although there is an escalation, it is limited in scope and the framework will remain the same, I think, for the foreseeable future until we finish our operation in Gaza, which can take a long time, Benita. It can take a long time.
Benjamin Netanyahu says he will keep fighting until the flag of victory is raised. That is, regardless of the international pressure, regardless of the spotlight right now. Your thoughts?
I think that's misdirection or misleading the Israeli public, because what is that situation? What is that picture of victory? Is that picture of victory once Israel holds the Philadelphia corridor, as Yaakov described? Is that going to be the achievement of the promise to completely collapse Hamas's military and civil capabilities in Gaza? clearly not. Israel's far from achieving that goal. Even the tops of the heads of the military are saying that is it'll take more than months to achieve that goal, and it will put Israel in a delicate situation as the Gaza arena shifts to be a more chronic, more kind of the West Bank model of counterterrorism. How does that play in with managing the borders, managing the different threats and fronts? Because you don't only have the Northern Front and the West Bank, you also have the threat from the Houthis and even further east towards Iraq and Iran.
Gentlemen, stay with us. We'll discuss this in even greater detail after a very quick break. Our coverage continues. Don't go anywhere. Back in a bit. And when we do get back, we take a deeper look at the plight facing families of the hostages. Stay tuned.
Tel Aviv is ranked the happiest city in the world and the best place to own a home. For 3 generations, the Ben Shalom family has built boutique apartment buildings in the most desirable locations. From restoration in historical locales to homes along Park HaYarkon, Ben Shalom is a one-stop shop from start to finish and friends for life.
Our breaking news coverage continues. I'm Benita Levine. 125 hostages remain in captivity in Gaza. Still no proof of life. 234 days since the Hamas terror onslaught and mass abduction. Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly said Israel needs to destroy the remaining Hamas battalions in Rafah so that what happened on the 7th of October can never happen again. On Sunday, Hamas launching a barrage of rockets from Rafah towards central Israel. Red alert sirens sounding in major cities. 1 person injured by shrapnel. Today, Qatar saying the overnight Israeli strike in Rafah could complicate talks. Initial Israeli investigation suggesting that strike targeted Hamas commanders, and the strike sparked a blaze which killed 45 people. So what does this all mean for the apparent hostage ceasefire talks? to find out. We go live to correspondent Balia Sladin. He joins us now from Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. And we know Qatar is saying those developments in Rafah could hamper talks over a deal. That deal, of course, remains elusive, with the possible resumption of talks on the cards later this week. What is the latest? What can you tell us?
Yes, well, definitely a possibility of a deal looks very difficult in the current situation. And it's not only because of the attack in Rafah. I mean, yesterday during a work cabinet, it has been said that they are waiting, or they will be waiting, for a response from Hamas in order to know whether to send a delegation to Cairo or to Paris in order to resume the talks. Now, Hamas, after this attack yesterday, is saying to El Sharq, which is a Saudi media, that after the attack, they are not going to participate in any talks. But just allow me to say that it doesn't have to be around this attack. This is not the first time that any civilian is killed in Gaza, or non-involved people in any Israeli attack. But Hamas and also Israel disagree on a major point, and this is the whole issue of whether this deal would lead to a permanent ceasefire or not. Israel is not ready, and from what we understand, there's a consensus inside the War Cabinet that all of the members agree that there wouldn't be any permanent ceasefire. They could go for a truce, maybe, but not a permanent ceasefire. But Hamas is very certain, or very standing on this particular demand that there should be a permanent ceasefire. Israel should announce that they are ending their war in Gaza, something that until now the Israelis cannot accept. Now, we've heard also the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, saying today at the Knesset that the lies, as he describes them, that he is the one that is sabotaging the deal, is absolutely not correct. The one who's sabotaging the deal is Yahya Sinwar, and the pressure should be actually aimed at him and not at the Prime Minister, but the families of the hostages here. And we've heard them today, yesterday, and the day before during the large demonstration that they are saying that even if the only option is ending the war in order to see their loved ones back to Israel, then Israel should take that harsh decision in order to bring back the hostages.
Thank you so much. Correspondent Balia Sladin, live from Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. And to that point, for more reaction, we now welcome Shai Venkat, father of Omer Venkat, abducted from the Nova Music Festival on the 7th of October, and he is still held hostage in Gaza, day 234 of the war. Shai, thank you so much for being with us once again on I-24 News. And we know Omer has been in captivity for nearly 8 months now, marking his 23rd birthday in the past week. I can't imagine how hard that must be for you and for your family. But we also saw you all taking to social media with a very powerful message to bring back the hostages. So tell us more, if you can, about that day, how you marked it.
Good evening. It's a very difficult birthday because Omer made me a father. He's my oldest, and he's 23 years old, and he's already 8 months at the captivity of the Hamas. And we are very worried about him because Omer is a colitis disease, and they need to take him out. His illness is making him worse. We know that he's suffering a lot from evidence that we have a long time ago. He don't get any medicine. His life is in danger. I'm very worried about it. I hope tomorrow there will be a negotiation again with the Hamas by Qatar or by Egypt, and to be supported to do an act to take all the hostages out. They are running out of time, and they need to take it out immediately.
There is no doubt time is of the essence here. So worrying as well, of course, when there is an existing health condition as well. I'm wondering how you feel when you hear reports like my colleague just gave, updating on possible talks, may resume, may not. Operations that have happened overnight could hinder those talks. When you hear this roller coaster of news cycle updates about what is happening, What is your sense about the efforts right now supposed to be happening in Cairo to try and secure a deal at last to bring the hostages home?
I'm in a roller coaster from the 7th of October. It's not easy to take all the news and all the media for a negotiation or possible negotiation and to create a new line that is supposed to go and forward for the next day to do negotiation and to stop everything and to take the hostages out. I'm not from the government. I'm not a military guy. I just want my son back home. The government needs to take an action. They need to take act and to do a responsible thinking and to do something. It's unbelievable that 8 months we don't see our hostages back home. And unfortunately, this weekend, we heard about another 3 bodies that the IDF took out in a rescue from Gaza. The government needs to take action and to do the best they can and the most efforts to take the hostages out. They can't stay and to say, okay, Sinwar don't want. It's unbelievable that they say that. I think there is an option, there is an opportunity. They have to take it, all the force. They have to do all the efforts to take the hostages out.
And Shai, we know, of course, that Omer is the grandson of a Holocaust survivor. To think what your family, generations of your family have been through right now. Tell us more about Omer. Tell us more about your son.
Omer is my oldest son, as I said. He's 23 years old. He's a brother of Ran, that is 19 years old, and brother of Maya. She is 13 years old. He's very handsome, very happy guy, very intelligent. He's like a mature. You know, he's a manager of a big chef restaurant next to Gedera. He managed 40 people. So you need to understand, he's my son. He's like a beautiful magnet human people. He has a big intelligence, and he's like a fashionist. He likes style. He likes to do tattoos. He likes to travel a lot. He likes chef restaurant. He likes to go to the music fest with the kind of music, electronic music. If it's techno, trance, or house, maybe. He likes also other music. He has a lot of friends from all aboard, from Israel, from the restaurant, from his youth group. I miss him a lot. He's very, very unique boy.
And we so hope for good news about Omer and for all the hostages, and that all your future celebrations should be together in person as it should be. Shai Venkat, thank you so much once again for being with us on I-24 News. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And now, for more. We go back to that news cycle we were talking about. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran. We were talking earlier on in this broadcast about developments in terms of a situation unfolding across the Egypt-Rafah border. What is the latest? What update can you share?
Right. So this evening, Israeli media is reporting that the incident occurred as the IDF forces were operating, exposing a tunnel on the Gazan side of the Philadelphia corridor. But according to the Egyptian position following the initial investigation, so Saudi newspaper El Arabiya citing an Egyptian security source saying that initial investigation committees have been formed, and the initial findings are that there were firefights between IDF forces and Palestinians in the area of the Rafah border crossing. The Egyptian security personnel opened fire at the source of the fire, and that basically they're trying to describe this as a misunderstanding, that this was not a Egyptian rogue soldier who decided to shoot at Israeli forces, but rather an operational misunderstanding. This could indeed be the case, but this is already, we're seeing the position that Egypt is taking on this. Again, this is not the official Egyptian stance. This is reports citing Egyptian security sources, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are many similarities between these initial reports that are coming out and the official Egyptian position that comes out following these investigations.
Obviously, a fluid developing situation, Avi.
I suspected that, as I told you before, because the area is full of terrorists, and it is maybe an incident which was initiated on purpose by Hamas people in order to bring about a confrontation between Israel and Egypt. But Ariel, I am now hearing what you say about the Egyptian reaction. I think, as for now, for this moment, they try to play it down.
Oh, definitely.
They could inflame the whole thing and say we were attacked by Israelis and it's another aggression, etc. From what I hear from what you are saying, for the time being, they are trying to put the lid on it and saying, okay, it's an incident.
Avi, it's even more than, sorry, I just want to complete the report. It's even more than that, because they're not even blaming Israel for carrying out, for responding over the top, saying that it's the international community that bears responsibility regarding the seriousness of the situation that is erupting on the Egyptian border with Gaza and the Philadelphia axis, which I think goes right hand in hand with what you're describing.
I'm quite happy to hear that, because, our relationship with Egypt, although now not very good, is still essential to the stability and peace of this region of the world.
Yaakov.
I agree. I don't think any tactical incident is going to undo that relationship, but it is worth noting that in that June 2023 incident that you referred to, the Egyptian authorities actually tried to cover up the jihadist motivations of that Egyptian soldier who crossed the border, killed 3 IDF soldiers, went on a real suicide terrorism mission, and then afterwards the official statements coming out of Egypt was that this was some kind of operational misunderstanding, trying to sweep the fact that an Egyptian border police officer at that time opened fire. So there is a history to take into account here.
Many questions remain about all the developments overnight and today. We always appreciate your insights. Thank you so much, as always. Avi Pazner, Yaakov Lapin, Ariel Osaran, always appreciate you being here in studio for this breaking news edition. Thank you. Now, Nikki Haley is in Israel on a solidarity trip. The former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations has today visited the site of the Nova Music Festival and communities brutally attacked by Hamas terrorists on the 7th of October. The former presidential candidate saying recently she would vote for Donald Trump in November. She is today emphasizing the importance of unwavering American support for Israel in its war with Hamas. Correspondent Zach Anders was in Sderot in southern Israel earlier and filed this report.
From Sderot this afternoon, where 2 former ambassadors, Nikki Haley, the former UN ambassador, American UN ambassador, and Danny Danon, the former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, both spoke here after touring kibbutz Nir Oz and the site of the Nova Music Festival. The 2 of them together spoke with some of the survivors and a man who lived in Nir Oz his whole life, touring some of the burned homes and the sites of the massacre. You could see the former ambassador Haley emotional at times. The press conference here, quite a lengthy one, speaking about her support for Israel, how Americans should support Israel in its time of need.
So in reference to Rafah, when you're fighting a war and your goal is to finish Hamas, you have to go where Hamas is. Rafah is a central area to where we know Hamas is. So Israel has to go there. So when Israel's trying to eliminate Hamas, they have to go into these areas. If those Arab countries are that worried, they should take them. They should go and take whatever Palestinian citizens. But if they're not willing to take them, no one needs to say anything. I know Israel's doing everything they can not to hurt an innocent life. But this is war. Israel didn't start this. but Israel has to finish it.
And an interesting finger-pointing moment where she once again states that Hamas's actions provided or pushed forward by Iran, which is funded by China, and that Russian-supplied intelligence helped Hamas to commit these atrocities, really an interconnected web of global culpability, as she's pointing out here in her former role as the former American ambassador to the United Nations. Her tour of Israel, meeting with officials, will continue for the next several days, and then she's planned to jet back to America, where she will be involved once again in this election cycle, despite her dropping out of the Republican race and saying that she would vote for former President Trump, but coming short of saying that she will endorse him in his campaign against President Joe Biden.
Correspondent Zach Anders in Storot in southern Israel a little earlier. Meanwhile, I24 News has spoken to Israel's former foreign minister and current energy and infrastructure minister, Eli Cohen, for his take on the war so far. Our Laura Cellier speaking to the minister in Jerusalem earlier in the day. Let's take a listen.
Eli Cohen, former foreign minister and now Minister for Energy and Infrastructure. Thank you for talking to I24 News. Now, we're 8 months into the war in Gaza. Yesterday, Hamas managed to fire a barrage of rockets at central Israel. Is this a sign that the IDF has not done enough to degrade their military capacities?
I think this just comes to prove how necessary it was to operate in Rafah. It was necessary to operate in Gaza in order to increase the pressure on Hamas and to release the hostages. It is also necessary in order to prevent this route of smuggling and tunnels coming in from Egypt into Rafah. And we intend to act against all of the Hamas battalions that are still in Rafah. Hamas is a terror organization. That's how it was defined by most of the European countries, the US, and most of the countries of the free world.
I want to ask you about some of the splits in the government. Prime Minister Netanyahu's own defence minister, Yoav Gallant, has criticised him for not coming up with a plan for a post-war Gaza. He says it's either Israeli military occupation or it's Fatah, some sort of Palestinian authority. The war cabinet member Benny Gantz says he wants some kind of international force to take over. Where do you stand, and do you think that the Prime Minister urgently needs to come up with a vision?
The main thing we need to do right now is to completely destroy Hamas's military and governmental capabilities. When they set out to finish off the Nazis in Germany, nobody thought what would come after them. And when they acted against Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and others, nobody asked what will come next. But I can tell you what will come next. First of all, Hamas will no longer be there. The state of Israel has the intention to have security control over Gaza, but it has no intention to be involved in any kind of civil control over Gaza. But I think what will happen during the interim period, the international elements like the US, Europe, the moderate Arab countries, they will be in charge of civilian activity until the point in which we can make progress on Gaza.
So you disagree with Yoav Gallant?
I think that as Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant should first of all act against Hamas. That's the main thing. That's the most crucial thing. And I expect the free world to stand with Israel. On October 6th, we had a ceasefire. The ones who are responsible for the murder of 1,500 Israeli civilians, the murder of women, the slaughtering and massacring of children, those who are responsible for the suffering of the Gazans, the ones who right now, as we're speaking, are holding a one-year-old baby in captivity, people who are older than 70 who are still being held captive. So it's only one entity that's responsible for the suffering in Gaza. That's Hamas, which is being funded by Iran. And the state of Israel has been attacked over the past few months from 7 different places: Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Iran. It has been under attack, and we see this struggle between the free world and the militant and radical world. And the world mustn't provide any tailwind to terrorism as it is performed by Hamas. And the state of Israel operates according to international law. It does do everything it can in order to bring in humanitarian aid to Gaza.
Okay, I want to ask you, obviously, about the hostages. You just alluded to them there. 125 hostages still being held. The families, of course, are increasingly desperate. Some, but not all of the families, say that in negotiations, which have just restarted, the option to end the war in Gaza must be on the table. Otherwise, there is simply no chance of getting any of those hostages back alive. Do you think that is a possibility?
The option to stop the war, as far as we're concerned, it's not on the agenda right now. We in Israel cannot continue to live here with these despicable murders living next to us, people who have mutilated people, raped women, burned them alive, and therefore we will not agree to stop the war, and we are going to continue to act against Hamas until we find the very last one of them.
The ICC may issue arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu and Minister Gallant. The ICJ is considering South Africa's allegations of genocide and has warned Israel about its conduct in Rafah, did not tell it to stop, but has warned it about its conduct there. We've just had an incident this morning. 2 senior Hamas commanders were killed, but some civilians were also killed. Will this add to the pressure on Israel to stop its operation in Rafah?
We are going to continue with our operations in Gaza. Of course, we will do everything we can in order not to harm any innocent civilians. We are targeting the leaders of the Hamas, but the decision of the prosecutor from the ICC is scandalous. It's anti-Semitic. It's just like people will say that they're putting to trial Hitler, Churchill, and Roosevelt, that they're prosecuting all 3 of them. And President Biden has said that Hamas are even worse than ISIS. Chancellor Scholz, in his visit in Israel, has defined them as the new Nazis. So the balance which the prosecutor seeks to make is actually scandalous. It's inconceivable. We seek to protect and defend ourselves from that attack. We gave the Gaza to the Palestinians until the very last inch. Over the past 18 years, there was not one Israeli in Gaza, and they're the ones who chose to commit that crime. So now this prosecutor, Karim, seeks to weaken us so that we won't fight terrorism, but we will not accept any anti-Semitic attack, and we are going to act against terrorism, against the murder, against all those. Because what he's actually saying, that if a country is being attacked, it cannot defend itself. But the state of Israel is a democracy. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. It complies with international law. It has a highly developed judiciary system. And I hope that the judges who are supposed to decide on this motion will dismiss it outright. And I am now hearing from a lot of countries in the West, and mainly from the US and Germany and many other countries in Europe, that are rejecting the prosecutor's motion to issue arrest warrants against Netanyahu and the Minister of Defense.
Well, part of the case against Israel is that its critics say it is trying to permanently displace the population in Gaza, make Gaza uninhabitable. How can Israel defend itself against these allegations? You yourself said on 18th of October, the territory of Gaza will shrink after the war. And more recently, you tweeted, from the river to the sea, there will only be the state of Israel. I mean, how can Israel defend itself against these allegations when ministers such as yourself make comments like that?
We are saying very clearly, we will not agree to the establishment of a Palestinian state here. There are 22 Arab countries, but there's only one country which is the homeland of the Jews, and that is the state of Israel. And we've already seen that there were leaders who have told us, give Gaza to the Palestinians, it will become Singapore. But instead of Singapore, what we got is Hamastan. Now they're suggesting that we establish a Taliban state in other places. So first of all, this will undermine the security of the state of Israel. And also, what kind of a life did the Gazans have? There was no Israeli there. Did the people of Gaza have democracy? The answer is no. Were there any women's rights there? No. Were there any rights for the LGBT LGBT community? The answer is no. Was their economic situation good? The answer is no. They received the donations from Qatar. So what kind of a life did they give them? So all those who are now telling us to establish a Palestinian state are not even willing to take in one Palestinian refugee in their countries. So the issue of change in the population in Gaza, it's because we do not want to harm any innocent civilians. So there should definitely be some kind of a security strip between us and Gaza, because our people, I visited these moshavim and kibbutzim. The people there, they're the ones who wanted peace the most, and the Palestinians used to work in these kibbutzim and moshavim, and the Palestinians entered their home and massacred them. I was in the Quds family home where they killed the father and the mother and the 3 children. On that Saturday, they had planned to fly kites in